Thank you. Call to order the Committee on Finance and Property, the Committee of the Whole. Good evening. We're starting our budget hearings tonight with the City Council. I want to thank Mayor Cahill, City Budget Analyst Jerry Perry, Finance Director Brian Ailes, for all their work in preparation of tonight and the next few days, and to all the department heads. See a number of city staff here tonight: Fire Chief Peter O'Connor, Chief of Staff Jocelyn Ruel-Kursker, Lauren DeViznik, Ward 6 School Committee member, as I mentioned, Brian Ailes, our Finance Director, Lisa Dixon, our Assistant City Clerk, thank you for being here, Catherine Barrett, our Grants Director, Ronnie Jacobson, Constituent Services Director, Martha Lewis, Executive Secretary, and Amit Chiani, Assistant Finance Director. Thank you all for being here. Tonight's agenda, we have starting with Mr. Perry, then the Mayor, then Mr. Ailes, Chief O'Connor, and finishing with Chief Little-Lasher. And I guess I'll open it up to any other comments before we get started. Anybody? We all good? Okay. Mr. Perry, with that, we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. I come before you to give my oral presentation regarding my analysis, opinions, and recommendations associated with the FY25 budget as presented to you last night by Mayor Cahill. So I start with a couple of introductory comments. First off, as I think many of you know, I, quite frankly, at the behest of both the Council President and the Chair of Finance and Property, we were requested to take a different look-see to see how we do the budget process this season. So we did a revamp way of doing it. We reduced the number of meetings to hopefully get this done. We're hoping this is successful. I want to thank Ms. Kent in working with me on that as well. Certainly we'll see how it goes, and if we have to make adjustments next year, we'll certainly do that. But so I hope that the new process is more efficient for everybody. I do stop some of my comments kind of looking at Councilor Feldman, and who just looked at me like, where did this come from? As chair of the Financial Forecast Committee, we did a lot of work last December, looking forward, as you all know, with regard to FY25 and beyond. And we knew last Christmas that this is going to be an extremely challenging budget. We knew back then we had a $3 million gap at that period of time, and it was going to be difficult to do this budget. On top of everything else, we are also aware of the fact we had to deal with collective bargaining, not only on the municipal side, but on the school side. So it's no secret, I know, to the councilors that this is going to be a challenging year. I think most of the city officials who are involved with the budgetary process knew that. So these comments I'm making tonight really is more for the edification of the public, if they're out there listening to these thoughts and comments. We knew a long time ago it was going to be a challenging budget. This is my 8th budget working with the council, and in my opinion, this is the most difficult budget that I've been involved with. That's going to be some hard decisions I think all of you have to make. So I have to comment about that as we start our proceedings. I guess the whole reason that you have a budget management analyst was, as you know, 25, 30 years ago, the city had some financial problems and weren't sure what the administration and the council were doing. And so my role, and probably the most important thing I do on behalf of the city, is tell you whether I think you have a balanced budget, and you're going to get in trouble. And it is my opinion, based upon looking at the revenues and expenditures, of which I'll talk about here in a few minutes, that you do have a balanced budget for FY25. It would get a tax rate from the Department of Revenue if you would have sent it as submitted by the mayor. And but it is a certainly different budget than I think some of you veteran city councils have seen over the years, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In my view, there are 2 stress factors associated with this budget, which has made even that $3 million deficit even more challenging. One is, as we know, is collective bargaining, which is certainly not news to you all. And 2, which I'm going to talk in a few minutes about, is the North Shore VOC costs associated with sending students over there. So those are the 2 areas that really have challenged the budget process this year from my perspective. I can assure you, other than the North Shore VOC, across the board, including the school department, in fairness to them this year, we're looking at level services everywhere. But certainly on the municipal side, it's a minor tweak there with the DPS. We'll talk about that when Mr. Collins shows up. And then even on the school side, they certainly didn't expand their services. They're dealing with the challenges associated with collective bargaining. Having said that, I want to talk a little bit about the revenues. As you know, yesterday morning, actually, I forwarded you my annual report to you. I hope at least you looked at the executive summary. There's a lot of stuff in there, and I realize it's difficult, but let me at least publicly talk about some of my thoughts. The administration is projecting $166,004,910 on revenues to be raised in FY25. This amounts to $8,478,410 more than FY24, or a 5.38% increase. In terms of what we did last year, to give you perspective there, the budget last year increased, bear with me for a minute, by something like 4.3%. So we're going up quite a bit this year on the revenues and the expenditures. The general fund revenues utilize approximately a 3% increase in property taxes, using a roughly $700,000 of excess levy capacity. To refresh your memory, we had a little shy of $1.4 million. The administration, as the mayor indicated last night, is using about half of that this year to basically balance the budget. This will leave $688,636 remain in excess levy capacity. The growth as projected by the administration is $1,250,000. I agree with that. I think it's an appropriate number given those situations. The administration is also, to try to help the challenges of the budget this year, is only suggesting they use $250,000 to put in the overlay account for abatements, as opposed to historically they've done $500,000. I've reviewed the abatement budget. I agree with Mr. Ailes on that. I think we can handle it that way, and I don't see a problem with less allocation money for overlay. The local aid calculation is not as robust as we've seen in prior years. It's still up a little bit. Chapter 70 local aid amounts to just a bit over $15 million. It's smaller than we've seen in other years, which also makes it more challenging for the budget as well. I reviewed the suggestions of Mr. Ailes on local receipts. I concur with him, as usual, and I agree with his philosophy. He's a little conservative in this area. I think, though, he used a little bit more than we've seen in other years, but I think they did the right approach, and I agree with their policy on it. As you will see, and I think Mr. Ailes will talk a little bit tonight, he's going to talk about enterprise funds per your agenda. If you look carefully in my report, they've used retained earnings on all of them to transfer over to the offset the costs for the various fees, and those numbers are indicated in my report. There is sufficient funds from retained earnings in each and every enterprise fund to warrant the transfer, and I'm comfortable with the recommendations of Mr. Ailes on that. In terms of the water and sewer rates, a little bit more challenging again this year. The water rates are going to increase from $3.40 in FY24 to $3.90 per cubic feet in FY25. The sewer rates increased from $6.40 in FY24 to $6.50 per cubic feet in FY25. The new proposed combined water sewer rate is $10.40 per cubic foot in FY25, and it incorporates a 6.12% increase, which is higher than we have traditionally seen in other years. The reason you're seeing that is, to refresh your memory, we talked about it about a month or so ago. The administration came before you to do a $1.1 million water project on Hale Street, which required us to use a considerable amount of our retained earnings, and as such is not sufficient amount to offset the water rates. So unfortunately, we had to go up in the rates to make it balanced. So I bring that to your attention as well. With regard to expenditures, their revenues match expenditures, again, $166,004,910. It's consistent with what I'm looking at the revenue projections. The Beverly Public School System is receiving a 7.72% increase from FY25, or an additional $5,613,124, for a total request of $78,267,064. The district, both on the municipal side and on the school side, has reserved funding for collective bargaining. The school, I give them a little credit. This year they had problems. The rest of the funding ran out, and certainly they're having some challenges over there as well. But based on my review of their budget, the school plans are reducing $7.4 full-time employees in the, what I call the general fund side of the budget, and I guess they're looking to reduce 13 FTEs due to the end of the ESSER funding. So the schools are trying to adjust to the fiscal reality we're facing here. And I have to, quite frankly, I've talked about this, but I want to give them a few compliments for trying to do the right thing budgetarily. Roads and sidewalks, a little bit different here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the shift that's going on there. But basically, as you know, we reduced the roads and sidewalk appropriation by, I think it's about $850,000. This is the new reality I think you're facing here, and I'm going to talk about this in a few more minutes. And it's the administration's intention, which you already have before you, I think you're going to talk about it in 2 weeks, to use free cash to offset and to bring up the appropriation to a level that I think the City Council is looking for. And we'll talk about that strategy in a minute. I do want to talk for a few minutes about the North Shore Vocational School budget. As you know, we've had some, it's a challenge with regard to this budget here. Last year, in FY24, the budget increased by 25.47%, which was a large sum of money for the budget. This year, FY25, they're requesting 23.78% increase, another big budget issue. I would be remiss as your budget analyst not to talk about this a little bit here. This is going to be, this is not sustainable in the long run. We just cannot continue. There is absolutely no question this is a wonderful program, and there's no question there's a great big demand for the Beverly Public School students to go up there, but the time has come, I think we at least have to have an adult conversation. I think, as you know from your schedule, we're going to have for the first time since I've been here, the North Shore Voc people, I think Mr. Manzo's coming in, and I believe the school superintendent's coming in and to talk about this. I'm not here tonight to suggest we cut this budget in any way, shape, or form, but we have to begin a conversation and kind of get more transparent. What goes into these decisions of putting more students there? How are they doing it? I think we need to have a conversation with the policymakers in that area. Can they help us to understand ways we can raise revenue to offset some of these costs? It's a very difficult situation financially. Programmatically, it's great, but financially, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it. I had to go back to Councilor Feldman's report on the financial forecasting, and based on that review, in FY24, as I understand it, we had 169 students go into the program. This upcoming FY25, they're going up to 200 students. And according to the report, and we'll talk about this hopefully in a couple weeks, in FY26, they're going up to 210. And then FY27, they're going up to 220 per the financial forecast report. But hopefully we'll get more contemporaneous information with regard to that. And I think it's fair to say, from a strictly budgetary point of view, this has to have an impact on the Beverly Public Schools, because students are now leaving the public school system to go to the Voc school, and it's a conversation, the impact from a whole host of issues, policy, budgetarily, of how that's working on the Beverly Public Schools as well. So as such, I'm looking forward to those conversations sometime next week. I want to talk a little bit about strategic financial impact, that this budget is a little bit different than you've seen before. What's going on, it starts with the free cash. In order to make this work and not to overload the financial implications to the taxpayers, the administration dropped, as I already indicated, the free cash and offsets it with free cash, or at least that's what they're recommending going forward. This is the beginning phase of a change strategically in how we do budgeting, in my view anyways. This is all my opinion, of course, because we have historically done the capital project with regard to roads and sidewalks inside the operating budget. But because of the expenses of things like collective bargaining, school issues, North Shore Voc, things of that nature, they had to reduce that, and they're shifting it over to free cash. So you have to start thinking, and I think you're going to see more of this in the next several years, that we're not going to be able to afford some of these capital projects, in my view anyways, inside the operating budget, that's shifting over there. And it's something that you're going to have to contemplate and think about when you start doing your deliberations here. So I want to bring that to your attention. As far as future projects go, because of this change, if you will, somewhat, I do think there's going to have an impact on how we do capital projects here. As an example, we were very creative. Mr. Eels did a great job, several years ago with the police station. We figured out how to do the dollar store. I stopped there. The dollar store, it had to do with how we utilize free cash these big projects, we're able to figure out how to pay for it and do it. It's going to be more challenging, in my view, if we start tapping into free cash. We can still do smaller projects, in my view, things like fire trucks or dump trucks or whatever we're going to do here. But to do the bigger ones will make it more difficult because of the concept of how we're increasing our operating budget costs across the board, especially with regard to education and dealing with collective bargaining. In terms of the capital projects on the table, so to speak, I still am comfortable. I see a pathway to renovate City Hall. I see a pathway to do the McPherson Youth Center. But as we all know, you defeated the library project. Things like the library or other large projects like that, given the way this budget is being presented to you, is going to be very challenging, and I don't see a pathway on big, large projects of that going forward. So I bring that to your attention. So what are the tax implications with regard to this budget? As you know, the administration is suggesting $700,000 of excess levy capacity. It leaves about $688,000 of excess levy capacity on the table. You're going to, in my opinion, need the $688 next year if you pass this budget as is. I think it's kind of a given, and the wild card is the collective bargaining. We'll see how that plays out. However, I have to bring to your attention my concerns about FY27. The FY27 could be a difficult year. I don't know what's going to happen. I just don't know how collective bargaining is going to go. I don't know what local aid is going to look like. We don't know how the new growth is going to look. But it could be a challenge, in my opinion, in FY27 with this budget here. And so my view is you're okay this year and next year if you want to pass it. However, you got to bring that to your attention. What's going on in terms of how this is going to impact the taxpayers of this community, it's going to pretty much impact the residential levy. The commercial industrial values are pretty flat. We are seeing increases in the residential class. As you already know, we're the maximum shift to 175, we're already there, so we can't shift any more commercial industrial over to give relief to the residential homeowners. And I don't know if anybody saw yesterday's Boston Globe, there was a big article on the increase of residential values in various communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they reported the city of Beverly from 2022 to 2023 calendar year increased by 14.1%. So the values are going up. It's going to be difficult if we're going up on the levy by $700,000. Quite frankly, in my view, the residential classes community, if you do pass this budget, will bear the brunt of the increases going forward as opposed to the commercial and industrial tax base. I'm nearing my end, Mr. Chairman. The role of the City Council, as we talked a little bit about collective bargaining, that is not your responsibility. Most of you know that. I urge you to caution to stay away from those conversations. That belongs to the mayor and the school committee. Your job is to appropriate the funds, and if they get a contract, they'll come see you on that. As you know, and I just remind you all, state law, you cannot increase any line item. You can also not transfer from one line item to another. All you have the legal authority to do is cut a budget. So that's up to you, of course, from a policy perspective. Is with regard to the school budget, under the Ed Reform Act of 1993, I think it is, your only authority is the bottom line. You are not, you cannot cut line items within that. Belongs to the school committee, as they know, but you do have authority to determine what the bottom line is with regard to the school budget. As far as my role in all this, I am not, unless it's something serious, I will defer to your judgment and wisdom. It's a policy decision if you decide to cut budgets, unless I think it'll have a detrimental impact on the operations of the budget. As Councilor St. Hilaire knows, I rose last year against his thought process to do reserve from unforeseen. I would rise on something like that, but in general, I would stay silent on whatever you decide you want to do. Again, to complete my comments, it's a balanced budget. You'll get a tax rate. By law, you have to pass a budget by June 30th. Otherwise, the whole city shuts down. I'm sure you'll do that. I'm here to attend all your budget deliberations to assist you in whatever manner you deem appropriate. And Mr. Chairman, that completes my commentary. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or be more than happy to sit down and wait for any questions anybody may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. I would open it up to councilors. Any questions, comments? Mr. Perry, Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. I appreciate the analysis and just had one big picture question. I'm sure we may have others sort of department by department, but when you think about the financial forecast going forward And you've described passing this budget in its form would start to create more pressure over time. So next year would anticipate going up to the full levy limit. The following year would anticipate it getting difficult. Is there a level of spending that you feel sort of on the expenditure side would put us on a more responsible path for fiscal year 26, 27?
Well, a couple of thoughts. I want to be fair to the administration and the school folks, too. In general, it's a level services budget. So really the wild card, and I'm trying to be careful here, is collective bargaining. So we have to sit back and see how they make out with all that. And that's going to be the big driving force. I guess the only area to answer that specific question that I am concerned, which I've already talked about, is the North Shore Voc. And again, I think I'm hoping we get a little bit more transparent, better understanding how they make the sausage and all that stuff. But I guess that's an area, to answer your specific question, Counselor, that I am concerned about, and I think we have to have more conversations. And you can't do 25% increases annually for any line item, including that. So,
Thank you. Counselor Feldman.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one clarifying kind of comment question. You had said that the residential real estate tax will bear the brunt of the impact of this going forward. And just to be clear, we are at the max that we can shift to
yes.
commercial. And I know we discussed this also in financial forecasting, that commercial real estate tax has not bounced back since COVID. Like, we've never recouped.
The values have
the
not,
values.
correct. That's correct.
So that's a big part of, I found that in financial forecasting, that was a big part of the, where do we look for revenues? And it's unfortunately in the home values of our residents. So that's a big part of the clarity of the why they're bearing the brunt of that.
Yes. So the values, if you believe the Globe, and the assessors do a much deeper dive in this, according to the Globe, 14.1% increase in the residential values. The levy is going to go up instead of 2.5% by 3%. I don't know if you've been familiar. I've been watching a little bit. Mayor Wu in Boston has been trying to do special legislation to tinker with Proposition 2.5, whereby they're trying to increase the shift to go higher than the 175, and she's getting met with all kinds of resistance. It doesn't, from a distance, look like she's going to be successful. But even she's, and the other communities are facing the very similar problems of this residential. I mean, if you're a homeowner, you're very happy, but you're not happy when you get your tax bill. So it's going to be difficult, Council. You're absolutely correct. I'm doing the best I can to prepare the residents of this community for, even if you don't go up with the budget at all, they're going to see an increase in the residential class. But obviously, if you're going to go up 3% in the levy, it's going to make it even much more challenging.
Okay, anyone else for Mr. Perry? I'm sure we'll be utilizing you throughout the course of the next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish you all the best in your budget deliberations.
With that, I'd call Mr. Mayor to the podium. How are you? We're ready for you, yes.
Good evening. I did hear most of what Mr. Perry said as I was watching him in the other room. I also went over to the music performing arts banquet and saw some friends and family of yours, and I told them I had to come spend the rest of the evening with you, Mr. Chairman.
Can't be everywhere.
So we're going to look at the executive budget. I guess there are just a couple of things that I want to share with you before we go to questions. And I may ask Mr. Ailes' help with some of this as we look through these pages, but there are some percentages that may grab you. And I want to point out that on the sustainability and assistant sustainability positions, we all remember that we've had an anonymous donor who has funded each of those positions for 3 years. Year one at 80% of the cost of the position, year two at 60, year three at 40. So what we've seen is the sustainability director position, Ms. Keefe, she hit her 3-year mark last October. So this year, for the first year, will be carrying the cost of her salary completely. The assistant position, Mr. Lopez, if you remember, we started with an assistant, and then that gentleman left, and then we were without the position for several months, and then we hired Ibrahim. And so now, as you look and you see it on the page, the first 10 weeks of this coming fiscal year, it'll be covered at that second year level of 60%, and then we'll hit the full 2-year mark and go into year 3, at which point the donor will cover 40% of the salary. So that's where you have some additional costs there, as well as each of those two positions did receive a pay increase from this year to next year. I'm sorry, from last year to this year. Other ones that show I'm looking for the big ones. Well, the summer learning program, we zeroed out that line for a couple of years because we agreed that we were using ARPA funds to help run the summer program. But prior to the ARPA funds being available, we had been funding the summer learning program at $30,000, recognizing that was kind of an appropriate dollar amount and percentage of the overall budget to run the summer learning program, and that, in a sense, skin in the game of the city makes it easier to go to our partners and ask them to put their money on the table to support the program. And we've been doing very well with grants and straight donations for this coming summer, so the $30,000 that we're asking will help us really fully meet that budget for the coming summer program that starts in just about a month. And then the separation line, where's that one, Brian? Yeah. Page 24, just to remind you that we put that in the executive budget to start the year, and then when somebody leaves and there's a need to do a payout to an employee, it goes over to that department, and it gets expended out of that department, those department lines. So that ends up zeroed out, and we have to build it back for the coming fiscal year. And the only other one, Mr. Ailes, I'll ask you to take is the reserve for 57,810.
Yep, on page 24, there's a number of reserves there. They're the ones we typically see every year in varying amounts. The 57,810 is the reserve for collective bargaining. So that is our pool to distribute as we settle contracts on the city side of the budget. The school has their own contingency and collective bargaining reserve built into their budget. This just covers the city side unions. And then the next one is for non-collectively bargained employees. That is a salary adjustment reserve. And then the following one is the reserve for the 53rd pay week. Every 5 years or so, there is a 53rd pay week. It's about an extra day per year. It catches up every 5th year, and we have one extra payroll run. So every year we put aside effectively 1/5 of a payroll run, set it aside, and then on the 5th year, we pull all that money in and pay that 53rd pay week so that it doesn't spike the budget in any particular year when that 53rd pay week hits. Mayor talked about the separation of service, and then lastly, the reserve for unforeseen, and I will point out, as Mr. Perry mentioned earlier, the importance of that really has to do with the timing of when the budget's passed and our access to free cash. So the budget gets passed July 1, we're out of the gates, we're rolling. If there's anything that's unforeseen prior to free cash coming available, which typically happens in the late fall, we look to this line to help fund any unforeseen needs at that point. So we put this here, and it would require council approval to utilize that fund for any particular purpose. We can't just use it for whatever we think it needs to be used for. You all need to approve it. So.
And then I just want to spend a couple minutes with a few thoughts on things that have been going on in our office. So through our sustainability team, we have been able this year to finally get approval from the state and kicked off the municipal aggregation program that started May 1st and has got any of our residents and businesses who were paying the National Grid basic rate are now saving significantly on their electric supply bill. And that'll be in effect for 20 months, so we'll track, all of us, who are ratepayers and benefiting from the program, we'll track how the next 6-month National Grid basic rate compares against our contract, and hopefully our ratepayers will continue to save money throughout. But there was a very heavy lift on the part of our sustainability team, especially Ms. Keefe, in working with the community and with our consultant to get the information out to help people understand the program and their options within it. Just in the past week, after a third try, we secured, and you saw that in the newspapers as well, we secured about $1.5 million in federal money through the EPA Clean School Bus, Electric School Bus Grant Program. And that really was, well, Ms. Barrett is involved in most grants, sometimes on her own, sometimes in supporting people in different departments. Ms. Keefe really carried the heavy load in this process. The first 2 rounds of the grant program ended up, all the money available went to what are known as Justice 40 communities, larger communities, demographics such that they are seen as not having as much of their own resources to put to it. So the third round, which is the one we were funded in, was designated by the EPA as a way to catch those communities up that hadn't qualified and hadn't been funded the first couple go-rounds. So we now have funding in place to help us purchase 8 electric school buses over the next couple of years, 5 full-size, 3 mini, you'd call them, 29 or 31 student buses. And so we're working with our own team here at City Hall as well as the school department to move towards procuring those buses and getting them in service. They won't all come at once. They're not all needed at once, but over the next couple of budget years, next couple of school years. And then on the resilience side, as you know, we were able to secure grant funding a couple of years ago to do a study of the Bass River waterfront. We had already done a study of Aubert Park along the Danvers River, and then we received money over the past year to do a similar evaluation of our vulnerabilities and possible ways to address storm surge flooding, rising sea levels at Lynch Park. And so, well, Ms. Keefe initially was carrying that. Ibrahim took all that on when he came into the position, and he's been running point on those projects. But they've been working as a team as well. And so there's been a lot of progress made within those grants. You remember well, we didn't get a follow-up grant for Obeah last year, so I came to you and asked for some additional free cash to keep moving ahead on Obeah as if we had gotten the grant. So we used our own money there, and it set us up to go apply for additional grant funding for Obeah to get us through permitting and design so we can, with all these projects, it frustrates how long the timetables are with state and federal agencies, but the goal is to get us through design and permitting in all these waterfront areas in the city to get some improvements and protections made. Moving forward this coming year in sustainability, one of our real needs is to take, in particular, the findings that have come out of the Lynch Park work and start to share that with the community, because frankly, I never knew this about Lynch Park. I guess it makes sense when you think back. I never really knew it. 100 some odd years ago, whoever owned Lynch Park at the time was a private estate, filled in salt marsh. And where we now have the parking lot and part of the lawn used to be salt marsh. So here we are 100 some odd years later, and sea levels are rising, and the ocean wants some of its own back. And so as we look at the different ways that we can handle water at Lynch Park, some of the solution, I believe, both near and long term, will be hardening, seawall repairs, improvements. But part of the solution is going to need to be acknowledging that during storms, during high tide storm events, and hopefully not so much during regular high tides, but maybe even so, there'll be a need to kind of accommodate a certain amount of water in spaces that we've always seen as dry parkland. So this kind of thing, and better understanding what's going on along the Bass River, where the Bass River from 150 or so years ago is filled tidelands from the riverbank on up to Chase Street, even as far up as close to Rantoul at points. And so again, here we sit 150 and more years later, and the sea level rise and the water, because water is inexorable. So, we have need to look ahead differently at some of the properties we've enjoyed and always assumed to be accessible. And in order for the community to really kind of understand and have us all move ahead collectively, we get a lot of outreach and a lot of meetings to hold. I know when I first saw some of what our consultants at Lynch Park were putting in front of us, I felt a little bit of grief and grieving, kind of a little bit of denial. And so I think there's a process of figuring out, how do we get to look at our coastal resources and beaches and parks in the future, and how are we going to get to protect them, enjoy them, and really need to envision them a little differently. So there's a lot to talk about. I'll stop there on sustainability and just touch quickly on grants. And our team is here. You certainly can ask any of them any questions. But, we've secured over 80 grants thus far in this fiscal year, representing close to $8 million. And there's over $5 million in grants still pending. We're submitting grant applications through the One Stop program of the state this week, and including going after the construction money for the roundabout at Brimble Ave and Dunham Road, which we hope to get in the coming round. And for the first time, Ms. Barrett conducted a citywide grants training session. We had over 50 employees from various departments participate in this training session, and clearly that shows that there's both a need and a desire, and that can only help her in her work. She already works with a number of departments, helping, taking their subject matter expertise around what different departments need, and her expertise around how to both secure grants and then how to report back and meet all those, the data aggregation and reporting requirements. So that's clearly a win, and we'll keep doing that. So lots going on and to do there. Just a quick mention of Ms. Lewis's work, because in addition to all the work she does daily to make our office run, she is the secretary to the Liquor Licensing Board. And just a reminder to all of us that close to $250,000 in revenues come in through licensing each year, which helps us all to keep our operations going. On the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging front, we've had a very busy year with our consultants at HR&A. We've collectively made money available for them to be part of what we do for the last few years. We took the results of the equity audit, and over the last year plus, we've worked really hard at ramping up trainings for staff, for not just department heads, but going deeper into our departments. As many people who are interacting with the community and forward-facing as we could provide trainings for, we've done so, and that's really helpful in teeing us up to do better work. We also, and you know this well, we've made strides on language access for people who, for whom English is not their first language and need access to services and need our help in different ways. We've made the connection, which was a long time in the making, but made a very strong set of connections with the English language programs through the Beverly Public Schools, which is helping us make connections and build relationships with people within our community, communities within our community who really are underserved by our services, because they're not necessarily raising their hand, standing up and saying, I need your help, and yet they do. So there's a lot of work going on there, and we'll continue to. I'll stop there and see if you've got any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilors, committee members? Any questions for the mayor? Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I guess I'll just say an overarching thank you to all the department heads and the staff who worked on getting the ClearGov version of the budget ready to go. I personally find it really more accessible in a lot of ways, even though I'm used to the budget book, and I'm sure for residents I think this is. So thank you for that. I just wanted to ask, you just touched on the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and I trust we'll see this reflected in other parts of the budget, but I'm curious if you could just say a little bit about not just Ms. Fahari's direct work and what we see reflected in your budget, which is largely, by my reading, salary support for that position. But with the work that's happening, and we saw in the summary about the training for all department heads, can you talk a little bit about the intention or where we might see other places in the budget where that work is reflected as it becomes part of each department's work? I don't know if you can say a little more about where you hope that goes.
Sure. So a couple things. When we first started on the, this journey to address the institutional systemic racism that has existed in this country, right? And we all realized the need to put some real resources to it. We put $150,000 in that budget a few years ago. What you see here is essentially the same in the sense that Ms. Fahari's salary is covered and another $50,000 is requested within the executive budget for DEIB initiatives. The work that we hope to do this coming year, we will still keep contact with HR&A, but we're not looking for a big chunk of money to kind of re-up and do a lot of additional work with them right now. The goal is, and they've helped kind of set us up for this, the goal is that the core team, which is a number of department heads from departments throughout the city, including your own office, your clerk's office, number of department heads are part of that core team. And as I think you remember, that is really being kind of tri-led, tri-chaired by Ms. Teixeira as HR director, Ms. Fahari as DEIB director, and Ms. Ruel-Kursker as chief of staff out of my office. And so the goal is that we'll be able to realize more gains kind of across department by working with the core team. And the core team has really been broadened out to include, I'm going to get this wrong if I try to tick them all off, right, if I try to list them off. But, we started with departments we knew were interacting with the public the most, as in clerks, police, some of the community service departments, and we broadened that out some. You want to do that? Yeah, please. You want to just read them off? That would work. Thanks, Jess.
Hi. So yeah, the Phase 2 core team includes Counselor Feldman, Lisa or Christine from the clerk's office. From community services, it's Allison Babin from the library or Chris Gomez from the COA. And also, we've added Laura Delakai from health. We've added Ronnie from our mayor's office. Like Mayor said, Pauline is part of the core team, but also representing human resources. She's on the leadership team, but also representing human resources on the core team. Darlene Wynn from planning, Chief LaLasher from the police department, David Gelano from purchasing, and I think it's Erin Sweeney from the schools. Yeah, she's the co-principal. Thanks.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So just a couple notes there. Ms. Sweeney, I think everybody knows she's retiring at a young age to go do something, kind of a second or third career. At any rate, the schools will need to give us a new representative. But trying to go heavy on the community services departments. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where the core team takes us because, there are, I want to say, a plethora of recommended action steps in the audit, and they can't take them all on at one time. But, that's going to be a part of when they next get together, which will be sometime in the next month, to really set a course for the coming year for our work.
Thank you. Could I ask one other question?
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I just thank you also for elaborating some on that. It strikes me that it's not the same type of work, but just the way that you were talking about Ms. Barrett's grant training and the way that grants are now really distributed widely across departments and departments. Staff and department heads are thinking about those, that the goal here is for this work also to become ingrained in each department. And so I appreciate you elaborating on that. I wonder, just a more specific line item related question, I wonder if you could just talk some about what is encompassed in what is in our budget book 53010, which is emergency shelter and support for Beverly homeless population.
What page? Sorry.
22 in the budget book.
Yes. So we've had a number of these which prior to my time as mayor were going out as direct appropriations to different nonprofits in the community, which became clear to me very quickly through the solicitor's office that that wasn't a way that we really could be comfortable in procuring the kind of services that those not-for-profits provide. I mean, they were looking for municipal support. So what we did was, and you remember this, I think, we restructured things and went with 3-year procurements, and anybody can respond, and they were really modeled after the needs that had been represented. The $10,000 for emergency shelter in support of the homeless population for a few years was really not, it wasn't applied for by anybody. Does that continue to be the case? So, you know, we have other of those lines that various nonprofits have applied for and have, you know, we've been able to continue to support a lot of great work. That particular line hasn't really, you know, engendered that kind of response. So that's not to say there's not a need out there, but I think our partners are meeting those needs through other funding streams.
Thank you. If you don't have this answer now, we could just follow up, but given that, I am just curious, what would be an example? It looks like this year, $6,250 of it was spent, so I'm curious if you have a sense, just for an example of what this might be going for.
The financial team's conferring.
That is LifeBridge. There's a service agreement in place this year. There is an agreement in place this year for LifeBridge to provide some services for Beverly homeless.
Thank you.
So the first time in really a few to several years.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All set? Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Counselor Rotundo, go ahead.
Mayor, on, actually, just saw it up there. One second. Line number is 51301. It's your conferences and dues and stuff like that. Can you speak a little bit to that, the breaking down? It's 573010, my fault. $18,152. Annual memberships and stuff like that. Page 23.
Thanks. Okay. Right. So I think Ms. Lewis kind of tallies that up each year. We have dues for several organizations. And what else is there?
Mayor's conferences.
It's the membership for the U.S. Mayor's Conference. It is also covered, say it again, MMA. Does this line cover my travel to the annual meeting and the winter meeting? That comes out of a different expense line typically. Yeah. So this is pretty much all used up in the membership fees for those numerous organizations. So Mass Municipal Association, membership for the city, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is a whole North American network of sustainability directors, and I know Ms. Keefe has been active with them somewhat nationally, but more so regionally. They hold regional meetings and regional meetings. A regional conference each year. MAPC is the Mass Metro Area Planning Conference, which every city or town in the state is a member of one or the other of these area planning groups. The National League of Cities is the other.
So then, to assume then maybe line number 51891, expenses, would probably on page 22 be where your reimbursements for various travel would be, or would that be, I mean, it just says available expenses for the mayor, of the mayor and mayor's office staff.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Counselor Bowen? Go ahead.
Thank you. I think I have just one question that hasn't been covered on kind of line items, and then another comment or question if I can. But the line item question was around the city youth services supporting youth activities at the McPherson Center. I know we've talked about it before, that this particular line item has stayed flat, but we've supplemented with ARPA funds to be able to expand the hours of operation and some staff capacity. So just given where we are now, if you could just recap again the plans for continuing that level of service and whether the planned renovation will impact either service or the budget line before the end of this fiscal year, or sort of what the planning is for that. And keeping in mind as well, sort of the 2 or 3 years out, hearing how the finances are more likely to get more tight rather than less. So anything that, is a priority area that may not be fully reflected, sort of the full cost in the operating budget. I'm interested in is for that.
So couple things in response. You touched on the ARPA funds, and I know that we put out an RFP about a year plus ago, and the YMCA responded to and won that bid. And that money is we can use it right through December 31st or beyond?
Through December 31st.
Okay.
Expanded hours and staff.
So, and that was a number of things provided there, and you touched on it, expanded hours for staff, more programming offerings. And so I believe we're good through this coming fiscal year in that sense. That together with this funding, you're right, we're going to need to look a year from now as we see. The goal is that we'll be cutting the ribbon on the new youth center by about a year from September. Construction's meant to start this late summer, early fall. And so, yes, we do together need to track that and see how to continue to meet the need for, because you're right, more hours, more opportunity, more resources for our kids is critical there.
Thank you, Mayor. Counselor Bowen, you follow up?
Thank you. Yes, so so just my other kind of general question, and I'm trying to prepare these across departments, but just given that we have a budget in front of us that's sort of described as level service, want to get a feel for what we can expect sort of in terms of goals. And I appreciate in the online budget book, there is a goals section. So some of the departments have filled that out, which is really helpful. In the executive office section, it's broken down with recent achievements. So my expectation, I guess, is that the goals for next year are similar. But particularly since it's now a fully staffed team, which hadn't been the case in prior fiscal years with this level of funding, just thinking about like what expectations can be for this level of investment. So you mentioned some of the goals around coastal resilience work. That was on my list of things I'm excited about seeing. Continued strong performance on grant funding and how that brings in resources. So that's really exciting. A couple of the other things that I had sort of on my list, things I'm hoping that this level of funding gets us, and want to just reality check if these are the priorities you have, or if there are others that you didn't mention up front, but that we can be thinking about. Some were just the continued kind of regular improved communication with residents, city boards, and the council about major initiatives, timely responses to constituent questions and feedback, 1 or 2 of the more kind of visible DEIB initiatives, events, education, awareness.
Can I stop you just for a second? Because I'm afraid I'll forget this.
I can send it as well after.
Okay, all right, go
But
ahead.
maybe just if any jump out that don't feel reasonable or that feel like they're underestimating what you would do. So 1 or 2 of those more visible things every quarter, 2 or 3 of the less visible things, like the action steps happening within departments, direct work with residents, kind of general organizational management work, kind of happening at any given time in the DEIB office. The coordinated advocacy that's been happening from the executive team to state leaders or other decision makers around the Hall-Whitaker Bridge, the Varian cleanup, National Grid, other sort of citywide pain points, and working with residents on those. And then just continuing to try and fill seats on the boards and commissions that we have, established by ordinance or that come up as opportunities for task forces or groups. And one that springs to mind based on the conversation already is, given that we haven't, in the last few years, had much uptake of the potential city support for programming on homelessness prevention and programming for people experiencing homelessness, perhaps, convening a group to look at that RFP process. I hear needs from all the groups that are providing meals and services in the city. So just seeing if there's a way we can convene a group at this time to see whether a different set of needs could be reflected in that RFP process going forward, given that there's an allocation to that again this year. So I know that is a long list. I can send them along, but it's.
And I don't know what the question, do you have a direct question?
The question is really, if we appropriate funds at this level, can we still expect to get all those things? Or is the team too stretched already, underfunded to achieve those things? Or is that really underselling the work we can expect for this level of investment going forward?
So, Mr. Chairman and Councilor, there are plenty of things in there that I agree with you on and that we're doing and will continue to do. I'll point out, for example, that Ms. Jacobson in Constituent Services is almost daily, forever, working on housing challenges that individuals face. She works extremely diligently with our various housing partners, and yet we all know that the safety net is very limited in its ability to meet needs of people. It does okay with emergency shelter for the very here and now. It doesn't do so well with helping people find reliable, stable, long-term housing. And she, that safety net is really meant to be a series of state and not-for-profit partners, and yet people come through our door. People, pick up the phone and call us, and so she just is diligent constantly. And I will say, sometimes we can't get the answers people are really needing, but she's had a couple great wins this past year. One just recently was somebody that she was working for 2 years to help out. And it really matters. And, more immediately, and she asked me for some help this week, and I'm trying to get it to her. We've got a young person who is going to start at Salem State in the fall as a freshman, but that person's family housing has just been thrown into chaos. And so we're trying to help find some summer housing to tide that young person over to the fall semester when they will be housed at school. So that's an example. So, to answer your question, yes, a lot of great things will happen through our office this year. I'm sure we will be imperfect, right? And we'll look to, to respond to things that are important to you as well as us, and we'll look to partner. I mentioned the outreach that we really feel we need to do on our resilience, our coastal resilience, and where we're headed. Another area that our office is going to be putting some significant work into in the coming months is we will be applying for CDBG funding through the state. It's an area that we haven't applied to in a number of years because we've been told no a couple of times. And it's a dynamic I didn't want to repeat. I didn't want to keep kind of banging up against a brick wall there. So I went and met with the Secretary of Housing and met with the director of the CDBG program and confirmed, in fact, that we are squarely categorically eligible, and they encouraged us to go ahead through the process, and we're going to meet with them and try to get a better handle on how to put the best, how to target the right type of support and help, because the CDBG program covers infrastructure, it covers social services, it covers housing, private and public housing improvement. So we will be spending time, because that's one of the more complex and time demanding programs to apply through. So, but we're making a definite decision to try for some funding through that program. We also, as you folks know, we have reconstituted, with your help, the ECDC, and we are kicking off an effort to really get our arms around how our local business community, particularly our small business community, are doing, and how we can identify and go after the resources to better help them as a community. So fairly significant initiatives that various people within the executive offices will be a part of. So yes, and we'll keep doing our best with that. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks.
Councilors, Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor, for your description of the work that your office has been doing. I want to ask a couple of questions specific to sustainability, and these may be questions that Ms. Keefe can better answer. You mentioned generally some accomplishments of the executive office in this area and some projects that we'll likely be working on. You mentioned Obeah Park. Could you elaborate on maybe even drilling deeper than just the general work that will likely, or not Obeah, well, Obeah and then the general work at Lynch Park? Could you elaborate on some specific milestones in those projects that are upcoming in this year? And then within that context, maybe talk about the benefit to the city of having 2 full-time positions working on sustainability, and on the other end, what we would lose if we only had 1 position working on these initiatives. And in a second question that's related, where are we in terms of staffing for these initiatives when compared to some other cities our size? Are other cities staffing up for dedicated positions to these initiatives, or are we out in front in that regard still?
2024, 2025. The impacts on our coastal resources, our 14 miles of coastline, are very real. Our need and our commitment to drive down our emissions is something that is, I would put it at the top of the list. So 2 positions, no, that's not ahead of the curve in any way. 2 positions is not extravagant. I can't think of many things that we're doing that we're doing a lot of impactful things. These are among them, right? So just to go to kind of some specifics around Lynch Park. So the grant that we received, there's a finished product due at the end of June. We will get, among other things, we'll get some scenarios, some different options on how we might look to invest longer term in the park so that, as I said, we're able to keep the water out in some places and know where to channel the water in others when it demands coming in. And so that's a part of the work product that the money from the grant bought us. The money from the grant also bought us our consultants' work to apply for a seawall grant. So that application has gone in, and that is, it's an application for the next set of design and permitting work, right, for the seawall repairs. What we asked them is, look, what can we do in the meantime? We don't want to just sit here and wait and watch while all these state and federal agencies take their time to permit us to do repairs in 2 years or 3 years, because that's what it's going to take. So another question to them has been, what are we able to and allowed to do? And so the feedback that that we're able to get is, land side of the seawall is where we can do work, and we still have to work with our own Concom. So that's helped us to kind of identify some work and some efforts that are happening now with David Spitaleri, our conservation agent, with Commissioner Collins, with the engineering team, with the sustainability team, to try to get us to where we can more quickly, as in the next month or 2, try to make some basic repairs at Lynch. Over at Obeah, we've done some things that are the maximum we're allowed to do without getting permitted and approved to do something more significant. And so the next steps, for example, at Obeah, we're applying for another grant. And with the free cash that you folks made available, we have gotten ourselves teed up to start the permitting processes. There are a number of permits, you can't get them all at the same time. We have both local, state, and federal permits involved with both Obeah and Lynch. On the Bass River, where we haven't moved ahead, that first grant gave us some sense of the vulnerabilities in some responses, and that's a little longer term. We're not so drastically right now feeling the effects of some of the storms. But it's there and it needs attention as well. So those are some of the, the specifics that we'll move ahead with in the coming year. If these grants don't come through, we'll have to kind of put our heads together and see what we can do in the meantime. But I think, we've worked with representatives of the government agencies that are grantors, and the next round of grants kind of follows on the work we've done with these, with the grants we've worked with. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that supply of grant funding to help us move those projects ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And so I appreciate that response to make sure I'm following the day-to-day work of this department that I don't see from my vantage point. It sounds like the real meat of the work is project management across a host of different projects that we, Beverly, as a coastal community, really need to focus on, maybe more so than some of our landlocked peer communities, and that having the two positions expands capacity to manage these projects, and that's really where, if we had only one or no dedicated sustainability position, the concern would be a lack of ability for the city within other departments to manage projects related to these pretty sizable grants that'll help us hopefully achieve some significant progress.
I think that's a good point. Prior to having these positions, it was me, it was the chief of staff, it was the city engineer, it was Commissioner Collins, it was Mr. Ailes, it was Dave Gelano, purchasing agent, it was the solicitor's office, and we were all looking at each other because somebody had to manage, and so yes, significant project management is a real benefit of this staffing on both the resiliency and on the mitigation. So the terms, mitigation is in sustainability, what it really means is driving down our emissions, right? And adaptation resiliency is about dealing with the effects. In our case, it's mostly coastal, but there are some heat island concerns in our downtown where we got a grant for and did some tree planting a few years ago to try to increase canopy and provide more cooling opportunity, particularly in the Gloucester Crossing neighborhood, where there's so much pavement and concrete and building and so little green, right? So the other point I'll make, and then I do want to ask Ms. Keefe to share, the other point I'll make is that resilience adaptation piece is, if you think medically, it's treating the symptoms, the sickness, right? Whereas the mitigation, driving down the emissions, is curing the disease. And so both have to happen. And you worry, well, is there enough money from the federal, state level? Is there enough money in the private sector? Is there enough money to, rebuild a seawall and things like that? Stormwater management for flooding that comes from, heavy rainstorm, inland or coastal. Is there enough money for that and to kind of electrify our buildings, electrify our vehicle fleets, drive those emissions down? And that's one of the things that at the local level we try to keep a balance with is, going after the ability to do both. Ms. Keefe?
Thank you, Mayor. And I think I'll just add a little bit of context just to respond to the question about, is two people, too many people? And we try to do a lot of work aligned with the City of Salem. They were coming up on our 3-year anniversary of Resilient Together, our climate action plan, and so we're planning to meet with them in a few weeks to figure out what kind of update we might want to prepare to show the progress that we've made in the past 3 years. And so for context, the City of Salem has a 5-person sustainability and resilience department. That's a full-time sustainability director. There's a full-time resilience manager. There's a full-time community outreach, I think she's a community energy outreach manager right now, and an energy manager. So we, the two of us, Ibrahim and myself, are currently filling those roles to the extent that we can. And Ibrahim, in addition to managing the coastal resilience projects, has a very analytical mind and has completed our green communities reporting, which is what in Salem their energy manager is fully responsible for doing. And then similarly, their community outreach person does a lot of the community-facing mass save work and that kind of outreach, which I've been doing for the past couple of years. And we're collaborating together on a lot of meetings working with those staff. So just giving a little context for number to number.
That's very helpful, Ms. Keefe. Thank you for that, and to the mayor as well, thank you for your response.
All set, Counselor?
Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Okay, any other questions for the mayor? comments? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Ailes, you're up next. Assessors, IT, enterprise, and revenue, however you want to start.
Sure, let me, if I could, Mr. Chairman, just generally kind of give you an overview in terms of the finance department. I know the agenda said assessors and IT, but the finance department's a little bit more than that for many of you watching at home or for those listening tonight. You know, it's kind of like the engine of a car. You know, many people just get in the car and turn on the key, and the engine goes, and you go, and you get to where you want to go. The finance department is similar to that. A lot of people don't give a lot of thought to what goes on day in and day out within the organization to keep money coming in, properly accounted for, proper internal controls, proper accounting, money going out, vendors getting paid, checks and balances, all the important integral things that an organization requires to maintain integrity and accountability and transparency. And so we operate 5 different departments within the finance department, 5 proper departments. That's the assessors department, and we assess all the values of personal property as well as real estate within the city, and eventually assess a tax associated with the values of those properties. And then whatever the values are assessed at goes to the collectors department, and the collectors department then is responsible for collecting those taxes. And they all have windows on the first floor if you're familiar with City Hall. The collectors department also handles all the collection of parking tickets as well. They also do a lot of day-to-day treasury work and reconciliation of bank accounts and such. We also have the auditing department, which handles a lot of work with the individual departments in terms of payroll accounting, accounts payable, and day-to-day kind of general accounting of operations within individual departments. So we're the support mechanisms that help departments deliver their services. We also operate the IT department. We all know what IT does, although they do much more than we kind of envision they do day in, day out. And then the purchasing department as well. And in addition to that, we have kind of the non-proper functions, which is like budget and treasury, which really doesn't have a department per se, but it's functions that we manage within our staff of 23 full-time employees. And I would also just say that we're extremely lucky in this city because our team in the finance department is incredible. They are incredible professionals, and they're not the people that you see, you know, vocally out there, you know, always, you know, tooting their own horns, but they're the ones that are behind the scenes making things work day in, day out, coming to work, and they take their job very seriously. And we're real fortunate here to have them. So overall, in terms of budget, which is why we're here, I do want to say that if you look at the overall accounting departments as a whole in the summary section of the budget, you can see that the municipal finance section containing the accounting, information system, assessors, treasurer, collector, and procurement areas is up about $85,000 or $86,000 year over year in terms of budget. One thing that you're going to see throughout all of the departments that have the BMEA collective bargaining unit employees within them, and all of the finance departments have this, is there were mid-year adjustments done in FY24 to salaries, and you all recall the salary adjustments that occurred late FY23, beginning of FY24. And those weren't reflected in the original FY24 budget. So when you look year over year, beginning FY24 budget to beginning FY25 requested budget, you're going to see variances mostly in the salary lines for those BMEA type employees because those adjustments are reflected. And so when you go through the accounting department, a lot of the adjustments that you see relate to those particular staff lines. And so now all the staff lines reflect what is collectively bargained obligation in terms of the salary that those individuals are slated to receive in the upcoming fiscal year. The major things I do want to point out, however, is that within the accounting department, there is a line, it's the last line in the budget, and it is insurance. And that is all of the insurance premiums for all the property and casualty insurance for all of the city, with the exception of a very small policy that the airport pays directly for their board liability insurance. But all of the property and casualty insurance lies here, and it's over $1 million. And you can see that there is a slight uptick year over year in that line item. And that accounts for the majority, that and the collective bargaining agreements, majority increase in the accounting department's budget. The IT department, which is the next budget, there's about a $80,000 increase when you look at the revised budget to the FY25 request. The major driver of that has to do with the view permitting software. I'm sorry, not the view permitting, ClearGov, OpenGov. I get them all mixed up. The OpenGov software, which came online this past year, has to do with the building permit software that we implemented this past year in the building department. And so that carries with it an annual a licensing fee, which is now incorporated into the EDP services line, which is at the bottom of page 30. So you can see the budgetary jump there. The assessors department, you can see, is actually a decrease year over year. Last year, the budget was around $560,000. This year, we're asking for just under $400,000. That has to do with every so often we have to undertake a major project, which involves a very thorough revaluation, and the costs associated with that have been set aside last year, this in FY24, so they won't recur into FY25. The work will continue into FY25. There's still some residual work we're doing, but the funds have been set aside in a PO, so we won't see those expenditures in FY25. So those have been backed out as a cost savings for next year. And then lastly, the treasurer collector department, you can see, is effectively level funded. There's not much fluctuation in there. And then in the procurement department, the only areas we're seeing there that we asked for some small increases have to do with the cost of day-to-day supplies that we're seeing increase on, particularly paper. The actual cost of paper we're seeing going up. And this area also procures all the supplies for all of City Hall. So when people need pens, paper, et cetera, they go to the procurement office. We have we order it in bulk for the entire office. And then the postage line as well. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick, partly due to the rate, but also there's been an uptick in usage, primarily due to some of the early election requirements in terms of mailing ballots and things of that nature that have driven up some of those costs. So other than that, they're pretty straightforward budgets. Happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Before I open it up to counselors, I had a quick technical question related to the book versus the digital format. In the last column where we talk about percent change year over year, it looks like the book in the digital format are comparing it to different columns, maybe?
Sure.
Could you talk us through that, just how to think about that?
Yeah, so when you look at the digital version, so the digital version, you can see the column heading there. You're looking at the FY24 budget versus the 25 budget.
That's the
and a
original
percentage.
FY24?
It's the original FY24 budget. So it's important to, this is a great reference point, right? Because it's a snapshot in time 12 months ago. But it's not the full picture, right? So to really kind of get a flavor of what's going on, you want to look at this. If there's an area that's concerning or you have a question about, then come to the book, look at the line, and it tells a more thorough picture where it may have, something may have happened mid-year which may have adjusted the budget. Maybe there was a need to transfer money in mid-year because there were spikes in expenditures, or maybe there were transfers out because we had, contracts that were renegotiated and there were savings. So there's oftentimes more to the story than is just the original budget that was requested 12 months ago.
Thank you for walking through that. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing it out.
Councilor Rotundo, did you have a question?
Mr. Ailes, I know we talked about the budget of the whole, and I know in the past you've talked about debt capacity and maintaining a certain level with the operating budget, and as well as, sort of as what our budget analyst has said, Mr. Perry, is we're shifting, so you are shifting your philosophy right now. Is that affecting our debt capacity of what we're able to maintain going forward with these major capital projects on the horizon? And maybe if I'm not explaining myself properly, let me know. It's just, I know you've always said we need to maintain them. The fear is always consuming it into the operating budget and losing debt capacity.
Yeah. It's a great question, and I've explained it a bunch of different ways over the years. Think of it this way: if you're at home and you've got a car payment, and for 5 years you're paying your car payment and it's $500 a month, and then your car payment all of a sudden goes away. It's great, maybe you go out to dinner more often, maybe you start doing things, but if you start living a lifestyle that consumes that full $500 a month, when you go to buy your next car, you're unable to afford the car payment. So now you're stuck and you can't afford a new car, really, because you've consumed that capacity with other things, recurring costs. And so it's no similar when we look at the city budget. When we talk about our debt capacity, we want to make sure we're able to service debt in the future, because large projects can't be paid for directly through 1-year budget or 2-year budget or free cash. A lot of times it takes a combination of free cash infusion, maybe some payments through the budget, and most importantly, a long-term loan that you pay over 20, 15, 30 years sometimes. Good example is the middle school, or the police station. Police station was close to $30 million. We obviously couldn't pay that in one lump sum. We had to draw it out, so we have annual debt payments. If you lose the capacity to service that debt, then you're struggling when you have a major issue or major capital improvement that you need to pay attention to as a city. So when you look at a debt budget as a percentage of your overall budget, it's really important to try to maintain and strive certain percentages of your overall budget. So if we were to go back in the time machine and look at 10 years ago, you would see, and I'm using very rough numbers, so don't quote me to these numbers exactly, and I can get you the actual spreadsheets, I don't have it in front of me, but the ratio was like over 7%, I would say, in terms of how much of your budget do you spend on debt payments, over 7%. Now, we're down around 5.5%, okay? So over time, that percentage of your overall budget that you're spending on debt and capital projects is declining. What I fear is that as debt continues to decline over time, because it's not like a mortgage payment where it's the same payment every month. It's a declining payment. So every year, the payment gets less and less and less and less and less. So the way to manage that is that you backfill the debt as it gets lower and lower, so you maintain a constant debt budget. If you don't backfill with certain things, whether that's cash payments for capital or whether that's new projects that you're borrowing for, that debt budget begins to erode. And then when you need it to borrow for a major project, the capacity isn't there, and you're going, oh no, what do we do now? And so that's what you're talking about, because I know we've talked about it a lot lately. So we're in the mid-5s right now in terms of percentage of our overall budget. This debt budget is a level-funded dollar value. It's not a level-funded percentage value, because the overall budget has gone up, but the dollar value has remained the same. So the percentage of the budget has actually declined in this FY25 budget. It's still not a place where I'm worrisome, but we need to be mindful that it really shouldn't erode much more without beginning to backfill some additional debt so that we can maintain it for the future.
Okay. So just clarification is you're comfortable right now that we're not losing the debt capacity to a point that we're in danger of doing future projects?
Where it's at in this budget, I'm comfortable
Okay,
with.
thank
Yep.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Brian. Counselor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions about revenues. First, I'll start with the pilot line, which is 00410 41800. I thought it was interesting that the 24 number the projection for '24 at about $325,000 is $75,000 more than what we're budgeting essentially for that revenue projection in FY '25. I would assume pilot payments are fairly consistent, so could you maybe talk about if there was a one-off agreement or something that might have spiked our collection in '24 and why that wouldn't carry into '25?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right in that they tend to be fairly stable year over year. What varies is the timing of when we receive the checks, because there's no requirement for these organizations to pay. It's a voluntary payment, so it can come in June or it can come in July. And depending upon when the timing comes in, that's when it has to be accounted for on the books. So if I were to go back, and I've got multiple years' worth of history here, yes, we've got about $325,000 for this year. The prior year, we had 276. The prior year in '22, we had 0, because some were paid early and some were paid late. And so '22, there was nothing coming in. And so they're all kind of staggered, but we do see consistent payments every year. There's just sometimes they lag a couple months, or sometimes we need to follow up with a particular volunteer organization.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question I have on revenues is interest and investment income. And I was in your shoes with the Boxford Finance Committee a handful of months ago. I understand the volatility of this revenue, especially given where interest rates were a few years ago and where they are now.
Yeah.
So I certainly understand putting a conservative revenue estimate here to protect the stability of our revenue estimates overall and to not rely on the spike that has been seen in interest income being maintained. But that being said, the difference between what we're projecting to collect at about 1.25 million and the 500,000 that we're budgeting seems to be almost too conservative, given that we're looking to draw from the excess levy capacity this year in a pretty significant amount, around 700,000. So could you maybe talk to some of the thought process that went into maintaining a very conservative estimate here, even when there's a need to draw from the excess levy capacity in order to balance this budget proposal?
Yeah, I mean, even though we're estimating 500,000, that's almost a $300,000 increase budgetarily from what we budgeted last year, right? So we're still capturing an additional 300,000. So overall, it's natural to look at a particular revenue stream and say, well, this particular revenue stream I think might be a little bit low, or this one might be a little bit high. But you've really got to look at them as a whole and how we manage them as a whole. And we all know here, we rely on free cash reserves for a number of operational, I shouldn't say operational, capital, one-time type investments. We use it for stabilization, OPEB. And so we've employed a strategy that relies on positive revenue variances year over year. You cannot have negative revenue variances. You would be in trouble. DOR would slap you on the wrist. So you don't want that. So there are areas, and they tend to be the areas with the most uncertainty, that we tend to hold a little low, because those are the ones that we are uncertain and could fluctuate. Now, we also, in this particular case, we would expect that this would generate some positive revenue variances, but we also don't know, for example, what could happen with the tax levy, right? We're projecting that we're going to capture $129.4 million in tax levy. Well, if 0.2% of tax payments are late, well, that's more than that's like $750,000 that we don't get in, in a given year. Well, I'm $750,000 short in the budget. So I've got to make it up somewhere. So there has to be positive revenue variances elsewhere to help cover some of those shortfalls that occur regularly, and they all balance over time. And you know, Counselor Sweeney, because you do this in Boxford, it's just, these numbers might be they might have an extra zero on them or something, you know? So I think it's at a reasonable place. There are also some areas here that you could argue might be a little closer to the margin than we're used to them being, you know? So overall, we've captured, I want to be clear on the number here for the record, you know, we've captured about $2.2 million more, aside from the tax levy, from other revenue sources. So it's not that we weren't conscious of the levy situation and weren't more aggressive than we would typically be in trying to capture additional revenue sources. We looked to begin depleting the proceeds for the Briscoe sale. So we're beginning to take in that money. We're getting more aggressive with our transfers from the parking meter receipt fund, parking meter violation fund. We refined our indirect cost allocation methods slightly to be able to recapture about an additional $100,000 in indirect cost transfers into the general fund. We are relying on additional enterprise fund balances within the sanitation fund so that we don't have to transfer as much money out to the sanitation fund. So these are all little levers that we employed throughout the budget process so that it all didn't fall to the levy. Because believe me, it's one of the last things that we look to in terms of a solution to support this budget. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. And to clarify, I do agree with the approach that the administration has employed in recent years to estimate conservatively, knowing that in a best case, there's free cash available for capital expenses, and in a worst case, we've reduced that potential liability and revenues coming in below expectations. So I don't want to say that I'm doubting the approach that the administration or challenging that in any way. Mr. Chairman, if I may, though, I would be interested in hearing from Mr. Perry, whether specifically to interest income or more generally about any of the comments that Mr. Ailes just made.
Sure, no, I actually agree with everything you said. I just would add one more comment from my old days. The DOR looks at investment income a little differently. Because of the volatility of that, it depends on the Fed and everything else, which we're all a little familiar with. So the DOR does kind of encourage municipalities to be very conservative in this area, because if it drops again, it could get complicated for future years. So bottom line to it, I think the administration, because of the volatility on top of everything else Brian indicated, I think it's the appropriate approach.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perry, and thank you, Mr. Ailes, for the time that you guys put into these thoughtful estimates.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Bowen.
Thank you. I have two somewhat related questions. So the first one was on new growth, which similarly can be volatile and is an estimate, kind of an educated guess based on what we're seeing around the city. So I know it is a little bit higher this year, trying to capture some more of that. Also, I was trying to look back. It looks like the last time it was actually at that level and not above it was 2016 or 15 or so. So if you could just similarly talk through kind of where you landed on that number, that estimate, given all the factors we're trying to balance, and you know, particularly as people look around the city and think about how is new development impacting existing residents.
Yep. So I'll draw your attention to the digital budget book, and you can see what you're referencing, the 1.25 million in new growth. In a typical year, how we would craft the total projection tax revenue, you would have a higher number in overlay, right? Because that's the money we're setting aside to cover abatements and exemptions. And in that case, you could be a little more aggressive in your new growth projection, because if it comes in under, you can come in under in the overlay and balance it and still hit the target projected tax revenue number. right? The assessors, right, they're the ones that set the tax rate. They would say, okay, you only got $1 million and you projected 1.2, well, then the overlay, we would zero out and not put any in the overlay, in this case. But given that we're only putting 250 in the overlay, that's another way of generating that additional tax revenue without it hitting the taxpayer, right? It's the same general concept. But in a typical year, you're right, recently we've been exceeding the 1.25. We did pull it up to the 1.25 because, as I said to Councilor Sweeney's questions, we were trying to be as creative and as thoughtful as we could in the areas that we could push the envelope on. Given what we're seeing for building permits through this time of this fiscal year, we're confident that we'll hit that number. I will say, and I say this every year, that building permits will be kind of the canary in the coal mine, right? What that term is. That is what will likely be the bellwether for harder economic times, because with interest rates higher and the cost of capital higher, less money going into development and those larger type of projects, that's really where you get new growth. The majority of our new growth doesn't necessarily come from you and I putting on new porches. I mean, that helps, or new windows, but the bulk of this comes from large utility companies investing in their infrastructure, which we're fortunate we have going on right now, and we know we can count on that, and that's why I'm confident in this number, and will be for the next couple of years, I believe. That usually accounts for about $500,000 a year in the new growth figure. $400,000 to $500,000 in new growth comes from utility companies' investment in personal property. The next highest value is commercial and industrial investment, because the tax rate is higher. So we all know what's happening with the values of commercial and industrial property. We were right. Mr. Perry talked about that earlier. So we would expect that we're not going to see a big boom, robust growth in that area going forward. So, we'll know more in the next couple months, but I think it's a fair place to be. It's not overly aggressive. It's not overly conservative.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Did you have a follow-up to that, Councilor Paul?
Sort of a follow-up on a different topic, but back to the pilot question, if I may.
Okay.
So I similarly was looking at that payment in lieu of taxes line, and first was just wondering if the entities that are mentioned are the only ones paying, or if there is a broader list somewhere. I couldn't remember from past years.
Do we mention them specifically?
Do you have a page number, Councilor Bowen?
Yeah, sorry, on page 5 of the physical copy.
Yeah.
I didn't question.
Those are them.
Okay. And so, sort of as a general question, I've been thinking a lot about what other municipalities are doing. As you mentioned, these are voluntary payments from entities who are not taxed on the property that they own in the city. And they generally make those payments as sort of a token of, we understand the fire department, the police department, the roads and sidewalks, we use them. We also provide, public services in some way. So, generally they're making sort of a token payment to account for some of the city services that they use, but not what the full value of the property taxes would be, because they're also providing other benefits to the community. There are communities that sort of sit down and say, what would the value of these properties be if they were taxable? What is a reasonable ask across the board by some standard? It's usually based on what those kind of core public services that those entities might use include, and set a benchmark and put that out publicly. Here's what we think a fair pilot payment would be for entities with property values above this level. it's something I would love to see us look into as sort of a like public process that includes our partners in the city who own property and operate as nonprofits, so that it's not just a one-sided, city sort of saying, hey, we wish you would pay us more, and here's how we calculated that, but really a discussion about what a transparent and consistent process could be. So I'm wondering if that's something that the assessor's team, that your team have capacity to support on, if that's something that you've looked at before as a strategy that's worked in some other communities to increase those payments and also just make them more transparent, more clear how those numbers are arrived at. Most of them give the community partners some opportunity to also quantify some of the value they provide back that's not financial, so that it really just helps build that relationship.
Yeah, sure. I'd be interested in learning more, specifically, the communities and, what they've strategized and if they've been successful and, the efforts and how much it's yielded. And we can talk to the assessors as well, see what their thoughts are. I believe some of our assessors may have experience in some of the communities you're referring to as well, so it might be helpful. Thank you.
Counselor Spang.
I'm actually on the same page, on page 5 at the bottom. It talks about intergovernmental revenue from abatement categories. And I was just curious if any of that is related to where we doubled the abatements through Councilor Sweeney's proposal, if that would affect any of this in any way, or is it not really related to that?
No, we take that on our own. So that, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else for Mr. Ailes? Madam President, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ailes, I'm sort of shifting us back just to the different departments that fall sort of under this broad umbrella. And I just wondered if you could, we've heard a few times this is essentially a level services, level funded service budget, and you mentioned some of the increases that come from salary adjustments. I wondered if you could just speak to overall, is there any change in personnel in any of your departments, either reduction or planned increase for FY25 in terms of just numbers of personnel?
We have really good staff retention in the accounting and finance departments. I don't think that any staff have turned over this past year. I'm not aware of any that are slated to turn over in the coming year. I will, just as a footnote, I'm also a member on the retirement board. We did lose our executive director to a retirement, and we've replaced her with a new executive director, Colleen Laughlin, who began this week. So.
Thank you. And no plans to add additional staff that are represented in this budget, it appears?
No,
Thank
not
you.
not in the finance department.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ailes. I'm sorry, Counselor Bowen, go ahead.
Sorry, I realized I had one more question on the revenue side, which was around the assessments that are, I guess, increasing in net, so sort of decreasing what we're counting in revenues. And I mentioned the school choice sending tuition and charter school sending tuition as drivers of that. So was hoping you could just talk through that a little bit, and is it more students or just more dollars? Anything that's in our control or not in our control?
Just to clarify, so you're talking on the revenue side? Because you
feel
talked
like
about schools sending,
Yeah.
okay.
let
So
me-
because
let me find-
it's two parts of the budget, right? We have the assessments contained in the late expenditure section of the budget, which we get assessed as an expenditure, and then we also get some money that comes in that part of it goes directly to the schools for students that are coming into our district that we educate here.
Right. So it's the piece that we send out,
Oh, okay, so it's on the expenditure side?
must be, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So if you tab to the other section of the budget, it's the third from the last, and the very last page, 138, It's titled State and County Assessments. So these are the payments that I believe you were referring to that we pay out. These are intercepts from our local aid. So every month, we get payments from the state, from the Division of Local Services, in a lump sum check. And it's from everything. It's from the unrestricted government aid, it's from veterans reimbursements, it's from the Chapter 70 money, all comes in a lump sum, and then they intercept a portion of it to make these payments, and we get the net as a payment. These payments involve school choice for charter schools, as well as school choice for outer districts. So if a child decides to go to another district, and you can see, as you noted, there are increases in those year over year. So for the school choice assessment, it went from 547,000 in 2023 to, these are budgeted numbers, to 603,000 in 2024, to 620, almost 22,000 in 2025. Similarly, under the charter school, it was 370 grand in 23, 360 grand in 24, up to 374 grand in 25. Those numbers are derived directly from DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and given to the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, which then gets translated into the intercept amounts and assessed to us accordingly. How was that? Was that okay? No? More? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, and maybe Ms. Visnick can help, I was just double checking with Mr. Perry. I can bring to the superintendent the question, because I think the data on the kids, because these are all our kids, right? They're going to Beverly Public Schools, they're going to Tech, they're going to a charter school or choicing out to another district. These are all our kids. I think that the school department has that data year to year, and we can flag for her that you're going to want her to share some of that to help explain those lines. I also believe that for several years now, and I hope again next year, we remain on the plus side of the ledger in terms of the number of choice kids coming in versus those going out. And we've been able to accommodate those kids in our schools without really impacting staffing. We kind of look across grade levels across schools, and we're able to accommodate kids, and it helps with our budgeting. So, but I will make a point of asking her to be ready to speak to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, Mr. Ailes, before we let you go, I think we covered finance, IT, revenues, the enterprise funds. Anything to note here that we should be aware of?
So we can, depending upon how you all want to handle them, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Collins will be here next week. He's integrally involved in water, sewer, sanitation, and has involvement in some of the other operations, depending upon what topics we want to cover. But if we're talking just numbers, Amit Chani and myself developed most of these in conjunction with the department heads, so we can answer specifics about the finances if you'd like.
Okay, so I guess maybe we'll do both.
Okay.
If anyone has questions now for Mr. Ailes, otherwise, if there are more specific questions about projects, we can hold off until Commissioner Collins. Mr. Perry?
Yeah, just very quickly, in the area, well, all of them actually, but certainly things like the airport, the senior center, golf and tennis, recreation, they're all in balance. The revenues match expenditures. I want to make sure you're aware of that. We had enough retained earnings to transfer funds in there as well. So from a financial perspective, I can't answer operational, but financially I was comfortable, and I just want to make sure that the council's aware the numbers look good on the enterprise funds. I just want to raise that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Counselor Bowen?
Thank you. Just a big picture question on the water fund, I think more than the sewer fund, though I didn't look that closely at it. But just wanted to sort of wrap my head around, it seems like the overall operating budget is decreasing, and water rates to payers are increasing because there are fewer reserves subsidized to year from past overpayments. But if you could just talk about the dynamics of, are we using more or less water, being charged more or less, like sort of what are the dynamics behind the shrinking number overall for the Water Enterprise Fund operating budget?
Great question. So we, within the finance department, along with the mayor, struggled a bit with this because we knew that rates have to go up with the water department, with the water fund and the sewer fund. And we knew, especially as we roll out, eventually we'll be coming to you for a loan authorization for the replacement of the water meters very soon, that's going to have an effect on rates as well. And so when we looked at this year's budget, we tried really hard to get the expenditure levels down so that we could try to buffer some of the necessary spike in the water rate in order to support the spending level that water operations requires. There's two things that played a major role in the water rate adjustment this year. The first, as Mr. Perry mentioned, had to do with the retained earning balance. In a typical year, well, I shouldn't say typical, but over the last few years, we would rely on a portion of the retained earnings balance to keep rates low. And you can see that in FY24, we relied on about $750,000 coming in from the retained earnings balance and we treated it as revenue to keep rates low. Well, that retained earning balance doesn't exist because we transferred about 1.1 million, it was 1.1, out of the retained earnings, which left about $500,000 left in retained earnings. We are transferring in about $130,000, which will leave about, I want to say $300,000 left there. That's about as close to the margins that we're collectively comfortable going. We can't get any tighter than that. So that's as deep as we can go into the retained earnings. So that's one. You're losing the retained earning balance. The second piece that had an effect, which we haven't seen, has to do with the flow, okay? So we rely on how much water gets pumped through our system. And we set the budget based on what we expect to pump through our system a year from now, okay? So we have to guess. And in any given year, it's so dependent on weather. How are people watering their lawns? How often are they showering? How often, there's so many factors that go into how much water gets used in a given year. But if you look over time, there are some patterns that you can see and some rough kind of ranges that you can expect. And in this past year, we saw an unusual dip in the amount of flow that came through our system. And what that caused us to have to do is reduce our flow estimate for the coming year. Even if we think it's going to rebound to where it historically would be, DLS will not let us project growth in flow and assume a higher revenue than we've typically seen for flow, because they don't want us being too aggressive in our expected revenues and build a budget based on anticipated growth in flow, right? So they hold us to basically what our past flow has been. And because the year was so low, we had to bring down the flow, which puts the rate up because you still need to raise the same net revenue. So those are the two pieces.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Counselor Bowen, yeah?
If I may, just a quick follow-up. So one of the challenges with that, it sounds like, is the only piece of the expenditure side that varies with the flow is the payment to the water board, or does that not change?
Not really. It can slightly. It's more complicated than that. The payment to the water board is based on a previous year's proportional share of the flow. So if you have, let's say you have a drought year and flow is through the roof, well, it's going to be through the roof for Salem too. So your proportions likely will be very similar year over year. They might be higher in total volume, but proportionately they're probably very similar. And that's what drives the assessment. So unfortunately, no. I wish that were the case.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ailes. I think we'll move on for tonight. We may be calling on you again, but thank you for now. And we'll go to Chief O'Connor, who's been waiting patiently.
All right, I'll be here all week.
Thank you. Good evening, Chief. I love it. Thanks, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I know Chief Alasher asked me to take as little time as possible, using some of my time afterwards, so. I'd just like to start by saying, again, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just real quick, I'd like to just say, really appreciate the hard work of all the folks that work with me over there. Couldn't do what I do without them. So every day they're at work doing their thing, and especially, you know, I'll really call out the staff over there. Captain Kryling, I put a lot of work on his shoulders. He's done a tremendous job, and he does a great job. Chuck, the mechanic, a few years ago we moved over to the public works side. Chuck has done a fantastic job. This year we've done a lot of work in that maintenance line. You see my, going last year a little bit. Just a phenomenal job working on the trucks. So we'll kind of start right there and we can kind of move on. So.
Thank you, Chief. So I guess to start, I note that your department budget at $7,965,852 is showing as a reduction in the overall department budget of 3.6%. I know Mr. Ailes mentioned there's a reason for that. Do you, either of you want to explain that to us?
The biggest part of that is the new Beverly Dispatch Center, right? This is the year where the folks that I have up in Farallon, the 5 full-time staff that are up there, and any of the costs that were associated with that, are going to move into that new budget. The public safety dispatch budget is its own department, if you will. It doesn't fall under the fire department, doesn't fall under the police department. Stephanie reports to the police chief and I. So she has her own budget. It is a separate issue. So that money is shifted over to that department in this budget. So they may not be over there July 1st, but the positions are funded in this budget, so.
Okay, thank you. Questions, counselors, for the chief? Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to dive broadly into the dispatch piece, but I'm going to hold off on that now to ask you, Chief. Just one specific question that I had is with regards to, it looks to be sick buyback time.
Yes.
Department spent about $200,000 or will spend about $200,000 in 2024, but isn't budgeting at all for this expense in 2025. I can understand, you don't know who's going to leave and what sick time they've accrued and how that could factor into this. And correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, what this line item is, but could you maybe talk about, are we leaving a liability here if we're not carrying money for these payments?
I'll let Brian probably explain this a little bit better, but that used to be funded. It's funded at a different level, so.
Okay.
Yep. We centralize that
Okay.
in the reserve for separation of service, which we talked about in the mayor's budget. And as the expenses are incurred by the departments, we transfer the funding out and directly into the departments to cover the costs. Most years, the reserve covers the costs. Some years, like this year, it falls a little short, and we come to you late in the year and ask for additional transfers in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ailes. And then generally, Chief, I'm skimming through the presentation you gave us, which I appreciate, and I see the detail on staffing. Could you talk about, is that an increase from previous years or a level amount, and it's just a matter of getting to full staffing in this coming year that you're looking to achieve?
No, we've been staffed at 64 with the help of a couple of grants and the support of the city. We just have one opening right now from a recent retirement that we're filling. That'll bring us up to that 64 that we'd be funded at for the last couple of years.
Okay, thanks, Chief. And I'll hold on any questions for dispatch for the time being and open it up to other counselors. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Rotundo.
I guess it actually is this dispatch, though, that this will be playing part in, where it's all shifting over to it. I guess it's more process. Who is actually going, I know the two of you are managing dispatch. There hasn't been a lot of information coming to the council as you guys are still building this process up. So ultimately, everything is going to be, so Stephanie, the department head, is going to be answering to you and to Chief Lalasha for everything.
Correct.
All right, I just, for now, process-wise, I was just trying to get ahead on it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll defer back.
Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Chief, and thank you for the handout. I know I said to you privately I always look forward to it, but it is really helpful. Can you just talk a little bit about, or actually I guess I'll just check to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. I know you've explained, but the shift coverage piece.
So we have for overtime, there's a couple different pieces of overtime. There's general emergency, which is like callbacks for fires, callbacks for snowstorms, weather events, that sort of thing. There's shift coverage, which is what maintains our daily minimum staffing of 13. So when we're fully staffed, right now, again, we're short one, but when we're fully staffed, there are 16 folks assigned to a group. When we fall below 13, we have to hire to make sure that 13th spot is filled. So that shift coverage goes right to that. That's the one that keeps all 4 trucks on the road every day of the year. So.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Please.
Does that shift coverage, does that typically come from your own members of your department picking up additional shifts to help with that coverage, or are you pulling from other departments? I know mutual aid is somewhat different, so.
That is somewhat different. This is all our personnel filling shifts within
Okay.
the city.
Okay. Thank you. And my only other question, since I just mentioned mutual aid, I know we've talked sometimes about the staffing level in your department. I know you just talked about that you've been more fully staffed. Do you feel like, are we able to cover our own needs? I see the response times map, which looks really good to me, although I'm not a firefighter. Do you feel like we're able now to cover well Beverly and also respond to mutual aid calls the way that it's sort of incumbent on communities to work together?
Yeah, it's very important for us to be able to do our part in mutual aid. You know, I would love to have more people to make our response time even better. If you look at our response times, they're not bad. But as far as the mutual aid part goes, the one issue we've had over the past year is keeping trucks in service. Chuck's, like I said, done a phenomenal job, but we had a couple pieces that were sent out for maintenance and we weren't available to go mutual aid. But aside from that, I think we do our part and then a little bit more. We have the dive team, a regional asset that not many people else can provide, so we do a lot of that. But yes, we do mutual aid, offer mutual aid resources.
Thank you. And just as a complete side note, I'd like to thank you and your staff for, I know we talked about this last year, but you have a position in the senior tax work-off program, and just thank you for making that possible. I happen to know the person who's in your department, and she talks all the time about what a great experience it's been for her, so thank you.
She's great. We're happy to have her.
Making that possible.
Thank you. We actually have 2 this year. Another one, so,
That's
yeah.
great, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Chief. Counselor Bowen. Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't have any specific questions. I also appreciate getting some of the data, and we'll follow up if any pop up. But on the sort of big picture, like what we can expect from the department for level funding, even though it's, you know, the number going down because of dispatch moving. And it sounds like seeing more stability around the sort of salary and overtime lines, more predictability. Sounds like we've talked about, you know, the equipment and trucks getting back in service, the moving around of year-end money to be able to make a purchase out of fiscal year '24 money so that you're good on vehicles. So just curious if you feel like this leaves you with capacity to, maintain all the inspections, educational activities, all that side of the work, and also to be working with the Department of Public Services on building renovation plans, and then my yearly plug for work to continue recruiting towards having our first female firefighter.
I know.
I know
So-
there's no budget line for that, but
I know.
but capacity.
We're going through that process, and that's a tough one. That's, for me, I'm working to get to a position where we're having people come up through the civil service process. I'm still looking forward to it. Not gonna lie, my daughter's on the list. She would like to do the job. I'd love to see her on the job at some point. Just a matter of getting to the right positions on the list and everything else. But that's one part. As far as the service goes, I'm going to give strong credit to Captain Kryling. Captain Kryling has truly overhauled our fire prevention office. He's doing more stuff, and not to discredit anybody that was in there before, but he's doing so many things at office to bring it up to date. It's really amazing the amount of work that he's done. We're now getting some more work in with the building inspector, the building inspector's office, to make sure that some of the multifamily stuff that may have fallen through the cracks is getting caught up on too. So I'm looking at ways to help Captain Crowling kind of make that office a little bit more efficient, to help get him some more help into that office. But the reality is that they're doing a lot of work in there. And it's a lot of very, very meaningful work. So I think in the long run, the residents of the city are going to be a lot safer because of the work that they're doing. A few years ago, they can't get into every building. They can't get into every building that requires a fire alarm inspection. Some of the property owners are just required to do it on their own, and it's kind of the honor system. Hey, you're supposed to do it. What we can do, and what we levied a couple of years ago, was the opportunity to have them actually upload their inspection information into an online database. So now it's not a matter of somebody going out and look at the house. They can actually go onto this online database and see who's inspected, who's passed, who's failed, and kind of follow up from there. So that's one of the things that's been done. That program's going to take some time to really completely build out and help us, but it's definitely made a difference over the last couple of years for them in some of the licensing stuff that they have to go out and inspect, because they can make sure everything is where it's supposed to be before they even set up the appointment and go out. So, a lot of good things.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, I think we're all set.
Well, I was gonna say, I was expecting a question about the dispatch. So just before I leave, I have to just give props to the dispatchers that are up there. Since the beginning of COVID, when we did a big overhaul up in that office, they've been going through it. Some of the work that they've done has been amazing. They're phenomenal people, they're phenomenal dispatchers, and I'm looking forward to the way that this evolves in the next system, because what it's truly gonna do is make our dispatch system better with all of the really good people that Stephanie has hired and the people that are gonna be moving over, so.
Glad to
credit
hear
them.
that. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate the update. Chief Little, sure, you're up. Thank you for waiting.
I don't think I have much of a choice, but I want to thank Mr. Chairman, and Madam President, the council members, and the mayor for the continued support of the police department over this last year and past years and into the future. And as I always do, I want to thank the men and women of the police department. Again, I get the chance to come in front of the council and present, but they do the bulk of the work. They do all the work. I just have to come up here and make sure that we can get the funds to them to do their proper professional jobs and continue performing for the citizens of Beverly. But I want to also point out that Chief O'Connor's son has made the right career path choice, so.
Okay, councilors, questions or comments for the chief? Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one quick question, which I know is one that comes up every year, is overtime. It looks like we're on pace to spend about $900,000 in overtime in 2024. The recommendation for this budget, FY '25, is $800,000, which is about $100,000 less of actual spending, even though it's an increase over last year's budget. Could you talk about, from what you're seeing in terms of maybe if it's a matter of officers being out that are coming back on, do you expect that this is an appropriate number given the circumstances, or should we really be looking to increase this?
Well, overtime is always a moving target. Again, we're a 24/7 operation, so, we have to have people working all the time. We have to fill positions. Some departments can go short on a day if someone calls out sick or someone's injured, they can put the job off to somebody else. We don't have that same opportunity. This last year, for the majority of the year, we had 2 officers on injury for the entire year.
Okay.
And we've carried one of those over. Now, looking into this year, currently, 3 of the male officers' wives just had children. They're out on leave right now. One of the female officers just had a child. She's out on leave right now. And there's 2 female officers will be probably going out in the fall for birth. So, again, overtime is always a moving target. One thing we've been very proud of in the department is that over the years, we've never come back in front of the council looking for funds. We've been able to move money around within the department. We also get other revenue sources between 911 money that comes in, things to that effect, that we're able to take money. Sometimes we've made sacrifices on equipment costs. We've deferred them to cover the overtime costs. Again, hopefully, we'll do the same this year. I think the funds that are there now will cover our costs. But again, it's a moving target, and we'll have to watch as the year goes on.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And generally on staffing, I know we've talked about the jail diversion program and the grant money that the department has received and potential opportunities maybe to expand trainings that the department's offering through that position regionally. Whether it's within that specific program focus or department-wide, are you expecting to add new positions in this coming fiscal year beyond the department's current staffing level?
There is actually a budgeted position that's going to be coming forward on a grant. It's going to become a city employee. So what's happened is, the jail diversion program is a Leahy employee. They're not a Beverly City employee. That's a $200,000 grant that we manage for the 6 communities in Cape Ann. That's continuing. We've actually also now received a grant from the Department of Mental Health to have a critical incident training facilitator. So we are going to have a full-time person, city employee, that's grant-funded, that will train all the officers and firefighters in critical incident mental health training, and they're also going to be able to train our mutual aid partners in the same type of training, being paid by their departments and being subsidized by either NEMLEC or by other funds that come in. So it's not going to cost the city to train those outside agencies. Even some of the money that we're going to get from NEMLEC will train our officers in mental health training, so that we'll have all of our officers receive that 40-hour program. So that'll be an ongoing program. And it's Felisa McCarroll, who used to be our jail diversion coordinator. She will then also be able to help the department with any counseling and continue with our community impact unit and any other functions that come up. So having a city employee doing that is certainly going to help us. But it is grant funded.
Okay, then, thank you for the detail on that, Chief. That's it from me.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Chief. Counselor Rotundo.
Thanks, Chief. Couple of questions. Accreditation, I know I ask you every year. I know it's budgeted each year. Where are we at on that line, that particular situation?
So the company that's assisting us right now, there are 83 different policies that they've assisted in writing. We've been taking those in, going through them, putting a lot of them into practice. A lot of those also came up with the post requirements that came in a few years ago. So that's an ongoing process between myself, the staff, and the offices to get all those policies in place. So some of that money is paying that company to assist us, and then some of that money is also to be part of the program. You have to buy into the mass accreditation program. And the training, the CALIA book that comes out is a $900 book, just for the book when the standards change. As a matter of fact, in 2024, the standards went up to 6th edition. Well, when that happened, all 83 policies had to be rewritten and gone through again to come up to those standards. I believe there's 357 standards in those 83 policies that have to be met. So that's a continuous process. We're hoping to get to certification in 2025 and then go for accreditation after that.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, one other question, if
Please,
possible.
go ahead, Councilman.
I don't know if this is a question for you or if it's Mr. Ailes or the mayor. I know that there was and I'll ask because it's specific to the Ryleside neighborhood. As you're aware, we have a broken bridge. Right now, the traffic has been a little excessive. I know there was a $100,000 earmark that was, we had from State Representative Paracella. I know it was to help with mitigating efforts from the hall that are being closed. I know there was discussion of additional patrolling in the area, as well as maybe possible equipment, whatever the case would be. So I'm just trying to find out where we're at with that.
So there's a lot to that. We were able to get through our highway safety grants more equipment paid by the state as far as safety trails, speed trailers, tracking devices. Those have been added recently. Also, that $100,000 grant was a two-year grant, I believe. That's gone by, but we've budgeted that position into this budget. The 56 patrolmen are currently in this budget. And but there's now 3 full-time traffic cars along with the traffic sergeant. That's been the increase, is the 3rd traffic car. The traffic unit, the community impact unit, the traffic sergeant, along with the patrol cars, have been going into that area more often and spending more time, say, especially with the Bridge Street construction right now in the neighborhoods, spending more time in those neighborhoods doing traffic enforcement.
So that's what I want to make sure. I just want to make sure people are aware that you are actually out there patrolling the neighborhoods, even though sometimes they feel that they're not seeing patrol, but that money is being used for what?
No, absolutely. And again, like I explained, that there are 6 beats in the city by the 6 wards. We try to fill all every day, but that can be very difficult. So we may go down a car. We never take the car to the 1 beat or the 901 or Ward 1. We may reduce Centerville, we may reduce the farms, having a car double up in patrols if we have to, but we don't ever reduce a car on that side of the city for that reason.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Chair, just through you, so Chief is kind of answering the specific question about the effort and the resources in Ryleside. On the budget side of things, that 3rd patrol car has been funded largely by that state earmark for the last couple of years. We've added that position into the budget. So for the most part of the city side of the budget is, it's a level services, but there is a 56th patrol position that's funded in the proposed budget so that 3rd patrol position, 3rd traffic position is kept. It's one we don't want to let go of.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Counselor Bowen, go ahead.
Thank you. That was one of my questions about the staffing level. And also was hoping you could talk about the how it will sort of free up capacity for different roles or different shifts to have the public safety dispatch sort of come fully online and the civilian dispatch, because I think we had talked in the last couple of budget cycles about how, unlike with the fire department where there's actual staff positions shifting out, so the overall budget goes down and you have the same people doing the same work within the fire department. On the police side, you'll now have people who were playing a dispatch role some of the time, still on the payroll, but able to do other work. So if you could just talk through what we can expect in terms of whether it's, more visibility in other areas or lower overtime, or how you're going to be managing that extra capacity.
So to make it simple, it's 1 officer per shift, but in reality, it's 4.5 to cover 24 hours a day. So it's basically 4.5 individuals that are now going to be back in the street. Through collective bargaining and working with the union, that position is going out, it's going to be called a rapid response vehicle. They're going to have the free run of the city, and what they're going to be able to do is fill holes as are needed. So if in the morning, we always have to transport prisoners, say, to Salem District Court. Well, instead of pulling one of the cruisers off of a beat to go to Salem, that officer will be able to do that. Prisoner watch. Last night, we had a prisoner at Beverly Hospital all night. We had to put an officer with the prisoner at the hospital because we couldn't get someone to come in at 2 in the morning to watch that on overtime. That officer now will have the ability to do that. When we make an arrest in the street, say there's like last night, so we had the arrest on Broadway. Now, instead of 2 cruisers having to come out with the officers who made that arrest and tying up 3 cars out of 6, one officer can come out, grab those prisoners, bring them back to the station, and keep those extra patrol officers on the street. So it's moving resources around, but the goal is to have those officers, another officer on the street and many more hours during the day.
Great, Chief, follow-up question?
Yes, and so on a completely different topic, but I appreciate that, and I think it's nice to know that for it's not a large increase in the budget, but it will be a large increase in the sort of what people are seeing. And we're hoping to see those efficiencies too in how the dispatch works, so that it's not an overall added cost. But did have a question on two more detailed lines that we've talked about before, but just want to follow up sort of how they're going, which are the janitorial and electric lines. As a new building with very unique needs, understand that those will look different than other city properties, but they are still relatively high compared to other spaces. So how we're working to control those and manage those.
Well, janitorial is contracted out. It's not a city employee. And we've been having these discussions. Do we take that money and do something else with it to try to reduce the cost? So that's a discussion the mayor, myself, and Mr. Ailes have had. And we're going to continue to look at that. But again, that's a contractually bid position. As far as electric costs go, we're a fully electric building. We do have the geothermal, which helps a little bit, but again, we're still waiting for the solar. So until that is completed, we're at the mercy of the weather. If it's 90 degrees, we have to cool it. Not one window in that building opens. It's airtight. So what happens is if it's cold, if the heat's on, if it's cold, if it's hot, the air conditioning's on. It is what it is. And so between the ventilation, the HVAC, our electric costs, what they are. And again, different from other city buildings, we're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's still a cell block, there's still offices in the building working, the computers are all on the camera systems. We're monitoring, 135 cameras for the city. That's constantly going on 24 hours a day. So as electric costs go up, we're held by it. But I know that the solar project, as it goes forward, will help us with that cost.
Thank you, Counselor.
Maybe just one.
Sure.
Do we have a sense for when that solar?
I'd have to defer that to, I know that solar is maybe a year. I know there's been a delay with, that, again, a private contractor on that.
Yeah, so not this fiscal year, we won't see those savings, but.
So I've been looking for the chance to come up here to talk about dispatch. Say one thing quickly, then I'll answer your question. You heard that we're fully staffed, and I think it would be great. Our goal, there's a heck of a lot of training that those 10 full-time dispatchers still need to do, but our goal is to be, by sometime this fall at that point, that we're fully civilian, and the 4.5 FTE, the typically one officer per shift, will be available to be in the community. And that'll be fantastic. To your question about the solar at the police station, that's wrapped up in our work to try to recalibrate where we are with all of our power purchase agreements and help us to be in a position to go ahead and either on our own or contract out. Potentially on our own with the direct pay opportunity, we could potentially purchase and install. But right now, the key is that all of our credits are currently used up to address our electricity use. So to be able to have some more capacity, electricity use that isn't tied up with credits, so that we can do some behind-the-meter work of, generating the clean energy on site, using it on site. So really no update, because we've been working with folks at the DPU to figure that piece out to date. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, any other questions for the chief? Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you all. Thank you again.
Before we go tonight, Finance and Property Committee needs to take up Order 161, which was the mayor's budget, and set the public hearing. So I would entertain a motion to set the public hearing on the mayor's budget, proposed budget, on June 13th at 6:30 p.m.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, that public hearing is set. And with that, I think our agenda is set for tonight. We'll be back on Thursday, June 6th, right here at 6:30 PM to see Ms. Nguyen from the Planning Department, Allison Babin from the Library, Bruce Doig from Parks and Recreation, Williams from the Solicitor's Office, and Mike Collins, our Commissioner of Public Services. So look forward to continuing the conversation then, and thank you. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the Committee of the Whole. All in favor? Aye. I would entertain a motion to adjourn the Committee on Finance and Property.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.